My son rejected his deaf daughter because he thought she was broken. So I spent years learning ASL in secret, tracked her through a failing foster system, and at 75 years old, I didn't just become her grandmother, I legally became her mother. My name is Helen Brennan, and if you passed me on the street today, you'd see just another 80-year-old woman with white hair and a slow gait. You might think I spend my days knitting or watching game shows, fading quietly into the background. You wouldn't guess that the most defining chapter of my life didn't happen during my 43 years teaching high school biology. No, my real life's work began when I was 72, an age when the world tells you to sit down and shut up. I was supposed to be enjoying a quiet retirement, tending to my garden and living off my pension. But that all changed the day my son, Christopher, looked at his own 18-month-old baby and decided she was a liability. He looked me in the eye, his own mother, and told me he couldn't raise a child with a defect, claiming she would ruin the perfect life he was building in Boston. He called my own granddaughter a complication. He thought he could just sign a paper, hand her over to the state, and wash his hands of her existence. He thought, because I was old, I would just cry a little and move on. He was wrong. He underestimated what a mother's love looks like, even when it skips a generation. I'm going to tell you the story of how I learned to speak with my hands when my fingers were stiff with arthritis, how I fought a system that said I was too old to be useful, and how I proved that family isn't about who you are when things are easy, but who you are when things get silent. Pull up a chair, honey, because this is a long road. And while you're settling in, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because I have a feeling you're going to want to see how this fight ends. You know, they say that hearing is the last sense to go when you die. I've always found that comforting, in a morbid sort of way. As a biology teacher for 43 years, I spent a lifetime teaching teenagers about the mechanics of the human body, mitosis, photosynthesis, the delicate architecture of the inner ear. I taught them that a mutation isn't a mistake. It's just a variation. It's nature rolling the dice. But I never thought I'd have to explain that concept to my own son, a grown man of 29, while he looked at his own flesh and blood like she was a broken appliance he wanted to return to the store. That was the day the crack appeared. Not in my heart, though Lord knows that shattered too, but in the very foundation of the family I thought I had built. It started in a sterile office in Portland. The walls were painted that non-committal shade of beige that hospitals use to try and calm you down before they deliver bad news. Lily was 18 months old. She was sitting on my lap, playing with the zipper of my purse, completely oblivious to the tension thickening the air like humidity before a storm. She was perfect. She had Christopher's chin and my dark hair and eyes that took in everything, even if her ears took in nothing. The audiologist was kind. She explained that the tests were conclusive. Bilateral profound hearing loss. She started talking about options: cochlear implants, hearing aids, American Sign Language, the vibrant deaf community. She was talking about a future. She was painting a picture of a life that would be different, yes, but full. But Christopher wasn't listening to her. I watched my son's face. I knew that face. I'd seen it when he got a B+ instead of an A in high school. I'd seen it when his first car got a scratch on the bumper. It was a look of absolute cold disappointment. He didn't look at Lily with concern or love. He looked at her with calculation. He cut the doctor off mid-sentence. He asked, in that sharp, businesslike tone he used for his finance clients, if this was going to be a permanent drain on resources. That's exactly how he phrased it. Resources. He wasn't asking about his daughter's happiness. He was asking about the return on investment. The ride home was silent, but it was a loud silence. The kind that screams. Lily fell asleep in her car seat, safe in the quiet world she lived in. When we got back to the house, my house where I'd raised Christopher alone after his father passed, I thought we would sit down, cry a little, and then make a plan. That's what families do. That's what Brennans do. We face the biology, we adapt, and we survive. But Christopher didn't sit down. He paced. He paced the living room floorboards that I had polished on my hands and knees for decades. He started listing the problems as if he were reading a spreadsheet. He told me he was 29 years old. He said he was just starting his ascent at the firm in Boston. He told me that a special needs child didn't fit into the trajectory of his life. He actually used the word trajectory. Then he looked at Lily's mother, a frightened girl from Portland who looked like she was barely out of childhood herself. She was terrified of him, I could see that now. He told her that this wasn't what they signed up for. He convinced her, right there in front of me, that a deaf child was a life sentence of misery. He manipulated her fear, twisting it until she was nodding along, tears streaming down her face, agreeing that they weren't equipped for this. I stood up. My knees popped. They always do when it rains or when I'm angry, and I put myself between him and the baby carrier. I looked him in the eye. I told him that this was his daughter. I told him that being deaf wasn't a death sentence. I reminded him that I had raised him to be a man of character, not a coward who runs at the first sign of difficulty. And that's when he played the card I never saw coming. He looked at me with a pity that felt like a slap in the face. He lowered his voice, using that soft, condescending tone people use for toddlers and the elderly. He told me that I was confused. He said I was getting emotional because of my age. He told me I didn't understand the modern world or the complexities of raising a disabled child in this economy. I begged him. I told him to let me help. I said I would be there every day. I said, "Christopher, leave her with me if you have to, but don't give her away." He laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He told me I was 72 years old. He listed my age like it was a crime. He asked me how I expected to chase a toddler around at my age. He asked what would happen when I died in 5 or 10 years and left her alone. He told me I was too old, too frail, and frankly, too past my prime to be of any use in this situation. He said he didn't want his daughter to be burdened with a geriatric guardian before she even hit puberty. "It's better this way, Mom," he told me, as if he were explaining why we had to put an old dog to sleep. "Clean break, closed adoption. She'll go to a family that wants a project. I want a life." A project. He called his daughter a project. The betrayal wasn't just that he was abandoning her. It was that he was using my love and my longevity against me. He was using my 72 years of life, years filled with experience, patience, and resilience, as evidence of my incompetence. He looked at my gray hair and saw weakness. He looked at my trembling hands and saw uselessness. He didn't see the strength that had carried him through childhood. He only saw an expiration date. The next few days were a blur of legal papers and suitcases. I watched, helpless, as he orchestrated the surrender of his rights. He treated the social worker like a client he was trying to dismiss. He signed the papers with a flourish, not a tremor in his hand. The mother followed his lead, a ghost in her own life. When they took Lily away, I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. Christopher told the social worker it would be too confusing for the child if the grandmother made a scene. He framed my grief as hysteria. He framed my love as senile confusion. I stood at the window and watched a stranger carry my granddaughter to a car that wasn't ours. After the car drove away, Christopher packed his own bags. He was moving to Seattle, he told me. A fresh start, new job, new city, new chances. He was going to find a wife who could give him perfect children. He stood in my hallway, adjusting his expensive tie, and told me to get some rest. He said I looked tired. He told me to go back to my gardening and stop worrying about things I couldn't change. "You've earned your rest, Mom," he said. "Forget about this. It's like it never happened." He kissed my cheek. His lips were cold. Then he walked out the door, got into his car, and drove away to build a life that had no room for imperfections. I stood in the hallway for a long time. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. For a moment, I believed him. I looked in the mirror and saw the wrinkles, the age spots, the stoop in my shoulders. I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I am just a useless old woman. Maybe I should just sit in my rocking chair and wait for the end. But then I looked at my hands. These hands had dissected frogs, planted oak trees, graded thousands of exams, and held Christopher when he had fevers that burned like fire. These hands were old, yes, they were knobby and stiff, but they weren't dead. Christopher made one fatal calculation error. He assumed that because I was 72, my story was over. He assumed that an old woman's only remaining job was to fade away quietly. He thought he had closed the book on Lily. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the table where I used to grade papers. I pulled out a notebook, one of the fresh, empty ones I always kept. My hand shook a little as I picked up the pen, but I forced it to steady. He thought I was confused. No, I was clearer than I had ever been. He thought I was too old to learn new tricks. He was about to find out that you're never too old to learn how to fight. He had erased Lily from his life. He had left her to the mercy of a system that swallows children whole. He thought no one would remember her. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote a single sentence that would define the next decade of my life. It wasn't a diary entry. It was a declaration of war. Christopher thinks she is a complication. I will prove she is my legacy. I didn't know sign language. I didn't know where they had taken her. I didn't know a single lawyer who would take a case for a 72-year-old grandmother with limited funds and no legal standing. But as I stared at that notebook, I realized something that made my heart beat faster than it had in 20 years. My son had underestimated me because of my age, and that was exactly how I was going to beat him. When you're 72 years old, the world assumes your learning curve has flattened out into a straight line. They think your brain is a finished sculpture, hardened and set, unable to be reshaped. But as a biology teacher, I always knew that was nonsense. Neuroplasticity doesn't stop just because your hair turns white. It just takes a little more grit to get the gears turning. And I had plenty of grit. I just didn't have plenty of time. The week after Christopher drove away to his new life in Seattle, I enrolled in a community college course, Introduction to American Sign Language. I remember walking into that classroom on a Tuesday night. The fluorescent lights hummed in a way that reminded me of my old lab. The room was full of 20-somethings needing a language credit and a few social workers trying to pad their resumes. And then there was me, the old woman in the cardigan with the orthopedic shoes. The instructor, a patient woman with expressive eyebrows, looked at me with that familiar mix of kindness and confusion. She probably thought I was there to keep my brain active, like doing a crossword puzzle or Sudoku. She didn't know I was there to learn how to talk to the only person in the world who mattered. Learning ASL at 72 is torture. I won't lie to you. My fingers, stiff with the beginnings of arthritis, didn't want to curl into the shapes of the alphabet. My F looked like my D. My wrists popped and ached. While the young students were flying through the vocabulary, fingers dancing like sparrows, my hands felt like rusted garden shears. I'd go home at night, soak my hands in Epsom salts, and cry. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because I was terrified I wouldn't learn fast enough. Every fumble felt like I was failing Lily, but I kept going. I practiced in the mirror until I couldn't hold my arms up. I practiced while I waited in line at the grocery store, spelling out milk, bread, apple against my hip. People stared. I let them. I had bigger problems than the judgment of strangers. While I was training my hands, I was also emptying my bank account. I hired Margaret Liu, a family law attorney who had a reputation for being a shark in a silk suit. I sat in her glass-walled office, surrounded by the skyline of a city that was changing faster than I could keep up with, and laid my cards on the table. I told her I needed to find my granddaughter. Margaret was professional, but she didn't coddle me. She looked over her glasses and explained the brutal reality of the law. She told me that because Christopher had voluntarily relinquished his rights and the mother had done the same, the legal severing was absolute. In the eyes of the state, I was a legal stranger to that child. She explained that grandparents have very few rights in closed adoption cases, especially when the biological parents have signed them away. I listened to her list the statutes and the precedents. I let her finish. Then I looked her in the eye and told her I didn't care about the precedents. I told her to find a way in. I told her I had a pension, a paid-off house, and a retirement fund I hadn't touched. I told her to use whatever resources were necessary to track Lily down. I don't need to take her today, I told Margaret. I just need to know where she is. I need to know she's safe. That began the long, agonizing wait. Months turned into a year, then 2. I lived a double life. To my neighbors and my few remaining friends, I was just Helen, the retired teacher who was maybe getting a little eccentric with age. I attended book clubs. I pruned my roses. I baked pies for the church bake sale. But in the evenings, I was hunting. I was reading books on deaf culture, child psychology, and trauma. I was becoming an expert on a world I had no business being in, and I was waiting for Margaret to call. Christopher would call occasionally from Seattle, usually on holidays. His voice was always cheerful, full of news about his promotions, his new condo, the woman he was dating, a marketing executive named Rachel. He never mentioned Lily, not once. It was as if he had surgically removed that part of his memory. He'd ask me how I was, and I'd lie. I'd tell him I was fine, just keeping busy. I didn't tell him I was spending his inheritance on private investigators and legal fees to fix the mess he made. The breakthrough finally came when Lily was almost 5 years old. I was sitting in my kitchen, shelling peas, an old habit that helps me think, when the phone rang. It was Margaret. She told me to come to her office immediately. She said she had news, and her tone told me I wasn't going to like it. When I got there was another woman in the room, Patricia Owens, a social worker with tired eyes and a stack of folders that looked heavy enough to crush a person. Margaret introduced us and told me that Patricia had been quietly looking into the file, off the record, as a favor to Margaret. Patricia didn't waste time. She opened the folder. She told me that my son's prediction, that Lily would be snapped up by a loving family looking for a project, was a fantasy. She explained that the system is flooded. She told me that deaf children, especially those with no prior language acquisition, are labeled hard to place. Then she dropped the hammer. She told me Lily hadn't been adopted. My heart stopped. I asked where she was. Patricia looked down at her notes, and I could see her hesitating. She told me that in the 3.5 years since Christopher signed those papers, Lily had been in 4 different foster homes. 4 homes. My stomach churned. I felt bile rise in my throat. I imagined my little granddaughter, unable to hear, unable to speak, being shuffled from stranger to stranger. Unpacking her little bag, maybe getting used to the smell of a new house, only to be packed up again a few months later. Patricia continued, and it got worse. She told me the reports were flagging behavioral issues. She said foster parents were reporting that Lily was unresponsive, aggressive, and prone to tantrums. She explained that they were labeling her as difficult. I slammed my hand on the desk. It hurt, but I didn't care. I told them, with a voice that shook the walls, that of course she was aggressive. I explained that she was a deaf child who had been denied language for 5 years. I told them she wasn't bad. She was frustrated. She was locked inside her own head because nobody had bothered to give her the key. Patricia nodded slowly. She admitted that I was right. She told me that the system was failing Lily because they didn't have enough foster families fluent in ASL. She was being placed in hearing homes where nobody understood her, where the TV was just flickering light and moving mouths, where commands were shouted at her back. Then Patricia slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a medical report from her last placement. I put on my reading glasses. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper. Subject suffers from severe isolation, delayed social development, appears malnourished due to refusal to eat. Recommendation: specialized institutional care if next placement fails. Institutional care. They were talking about putting my 5-year-old granddaughter in a group home, a facility, warehousing her because they didn't know what else to do with her. I looked up at those two women. I saw pity in their eyes. They saw an 80-year-old woman reading a tragedy she couldn't stop. They saw a grandmother who had been legally erased, but they weren't looking close enough. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. I felt a cold, steel resolve settle in my chest, replacing the panic. I thought about Christopher in Seattle, drinking his expensive coffee, thinking his complication had been solved. He thought he had thrown something away. He didn't realize he had buried a seed. I looked at Margaret. I asked her what the requirements were to become a specialized foster parent for a special needs child. Margaret paused. She started to warn me. She told me the vetting process was brutal. She mentioned the background checks, the medical exams, the home inspections. She pointed out that my age would be a massive red flag for the state. She said they would look at my 75 years and see a liability. I stood up. I smoothed down my skirt. I felt every year of my age, every ache in my joints. But I also felt 43 years of controlling a classroom of unruly teenagers. I told them to get the paperwork started. I told them I didn't care if I had to undergo a physical exam every week. I told them I would renovate my house. I told them I would pass every test they threw at me. They think I'm just a helpless old woman, I said, clutching my purse where that damning report lay like a burning coal. They think I'm too old to matter. They're about to learn otherwise. I walked out of that office and into the gray city light. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was a woman on a mission to break my granddaughter out of prison, and God help anyone who stood in my way. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but nobody mentions that old dogs are excellent at playing dead. That was my strategy for the next 10 months. I knew that if I walked into those government offices demanding my rights, slamming my fist on the table, and showing the burning rage that lived in my chest, they would label me unstable. They would see a bitter old woman with an axe to grind. So, I decided to give them exactly what they expected to see. I decided to become the harmless, sweet, slightly fragile grandmother from the storybooks. I curated my appearance like a master spy. I swapped my practical trousers for soft, floral skirts. I wore cardigans that made me look smaller, softer. When I met with the caseworkers, I made sure my house smelled like vanilla and lemon polish. I baked cookies, hundreds of them, and offered them with a trembling hand, smiling that vague, kindly smile that suggests you might not be entirely sure what year it is. I played the game of masks perfectly. The biggest hurdle was the regional supervisor, a man whose suit was too shiny and whose patience was too short. He was the gatekeeper. Patricia, the social worker who had helped me track Lily down, was on my side, but this man, let's call him the administrator, was the one who had to sign the license. To him, I was a statistical anomaly that messed up his spreadsheets. A 75-year-old woman applying to foster a difficult, special needs 6-year-old? It was unprecedented. He came to inspect my home on a rainy Tuesday. I was ready. I had hidden the advanced books on deaf education and child psychology. Instead, I left a Bible and a knitting basket on the coffee table. I wanted him to see tradition. I wanted him to see safe. He walked through my house with a clipboard, ticking boxes with a judgmental flick of his wrist. I followed him, shuffling my feet a little more than necessary, playing up the arthritis. When he asked about the stairs, I told him I was very careful. When he asked about my energy levels, I told him I took naps when the Lord told me to rest. He sat at my kitchen table, declining the tea I offered. He looked at me with that professional condescension I was starting to loathe more than my son's betrayal. He told me bluntly that the state rarely approves foster parents of my vantage. He used that word, vantage, like a polite synonym for death's door. He explained that foster care is physically demanding and that the goal is usually reunification or adoption by younger families. I nodded, keeping my eyes wide and innocent. I told him I understood completely. I told him I just wanted to be of service. I said, "Sir, I know I'm not a long-term solution. I just want to give the poor thing a warm bed for a while. A grandmother's love, you know? Just until you find that perfect family." I lied through my dentures. I knew there was no perfect family coming. I knew I was the long-term solution, but I needed him to think I was just a stopgap. The system loves stopgaps. It hates complications. He seemed to relax. He started talking more freely, assuming that my old lady brain wouldn't catch the nuances of his bureaucracy. He took a phone call right there in my kitchen, turning slightly away but not leaving the room. He figured I was hard of hearing. I heard every word. He was talking to a colleague about Lily's case. He complained about the cost of the private facility they were considering. He called Lily a budget buster. He said, "Look, if the grandmother wants to take the hit, let her. It saves us $4,000 a month. The kid is practically feral anyway. Let the old lady deal with the tantrums. If it falls apart in 3 months, we just move the kid to the institution then." He hung up and turned back to me with a fake smile. He told me that he was admiring my dedication. He said they were willing to make an exception in this case because of the familial connection. Although technically, due to the adoption surrender, I was a kinship placement in name only. Then he made his mistake. He underestimated what I had been doing for the last 2 years. He pushed a document toward me. "Now, Mrs. Brennan," he said, speaking slowly and loudly, "this child is deaf. She uses sign language. Do you think you can handle the communication barrier? It can be very isolating for the foster parent." He expected me to say I would try my best, or that we would manage with gestures. He expected the barrier to be the reason I would quit. I looked at him. For a split second, I wanted to sign my answer. I wanted to flash my hands in perfect, fluent ASL and tell him exactly what I thought of his budget buster comment. I wanted to show him that I had spent hundreds of hours mastering a language just to save a child he considered a line item. But I didn't. I held the mask. "Oh, I've been practicing a little," I said, my voice trembling just the right amount. "I bought a book. I think we'll get along just fine." "Love is a universal language, isn't it?" He smirked. He actually rolled his eyes while he thought I wasn't looking. He signed the paper. He thought he was dumping a problem on a senile old woman who would give up in a few weeks. He thought he was saving his department money and buying time until they could warehouse my granddaughter. He saw a frail old lady who just wanted to play house. He didn't see the predator I had become. He handed me the approved license. "Good luck, Mrs. Brennan," he said, standing up and checking his watch. "We'll bring her by on Thursday. Don't worry if it's too much. Just call us and we'll come get her." "I won't need to call," I said softly. He walked out the door, satisfied with his day's work. I watched him get into his car and drive away. The moment his taillights disappeared, I straightened my back. The shuffle was gone. The vague smile vanished. I walked to the calendar on the wall and circled Thursday in red marker. Then I went to the special room I had been preparing for 2 years. I looked at the bed with the star-patterned quilt. I looked at the visual alarm clock that flashed light instead of making sound. I looked at the flashcards I had made by hand. He thought he had manipulated me into taking a burden. He didn't realize I had just manipulated the entire state of Oregon into giving me back my reason for living. But as I stood there, a terrifying thought hit me. I had won the war against the bureaucracy, but the real battle was just beginning. I had the license, and I had the room. But I hadn't seen Lily since she was 18 months old. I was a stranger to her. A stranger who looked like the people who had abandoned her. I had tricked the system, but I couldn't trick a traumatized child. And when Thursday came, I would find out just how deep the damage really went. The car pulled into the driveway on a Thursday afternoon that was gray and drizzly. The kind of Oregon weather that seeps right into your bones. I was standing behind the curtain in the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had faced classrooms full of rebellious teenagers, buried a husband, and navigated the shark-infested waters of the legal system, but nothing terrified me more than the little girl sitting in the back seat of that sedan. When Patricia opened the car door, I saw her. Lily. She wasn't the 18-month-old baby I had watched leave my house 4 years ago. She was 6 now, but she looked smaller, stunted by the weight of a world that hadn't been kind to her. She was clutching a black garbage bag, the universal luggage of the foster child. That plastic bag tore a hole in my heart before she even stepped foot on the pavement. It said everything. I am disposable. My life is trash. Patricia guided her up the walk. Lily didn't look at the flowers I had planted. She didn't look at the house. She was scanning the perimeter, eyes darting left and right, checking for exits, checking for threats. She walked with her shoulders hunched up to her ears, a defensive posture that no 6-year-old should have to learn. When I opened the door, I didn't rush to hug her. I knew better. You don't startle a wounded animal. I just opened the door wide and stepped back, giving her space. Patricia gave me a quick, tired briefing. She told me that Lily had been a handful in the car, refusing to sit still. She handed me a packet of medication, sedatives essentially, that the previous foster family had used to manage her episodes at night. She told me to keep the doors locked because Lily was a runner. She patted my arm with that professional pity and told me to call if it got to be too much. She gave me a week, tops, in her mind. I could see it in her eyes. Then she left, and it was just us. Me, an 80-year-old woman with a house full of memories, and a 6-year-old girl who had been taught that memories only hurt. The first few hours were a brutal education in what the system does to a soul. Lily didn't explore the house like a normal child. She cased it. She checked the locks. She found the corners. She refused to sit on the furniture. When I tried to offer her a sandwich, she slapped it out of my hand. It wasn't malice. It was panic. She stood in the middle of my kitchen, breathing hard, making low, guttural sounds of frustration. She had no language. That was the most devastating discovery of that first night. The report said she was unresponsive, but that was a lie. She was desperate to respond. She just didn't have the tools. She had spent crucial developmental years in homes where people just pointed or physically moved her like a piece of furniture. She had a few home signs, crude gestures she had invented herself for hungry or toilet, but she had no grammar, no vocabulary, no way to express the storm inside her head. I watched her pacing the living room, vibrating with anxiety. She looked at me with hostility. She expected me to yell. She expected me to grab her arm. I did neither. I sat down in my armchair. I waited until she looked at me, and then I played the card I had been holding up my sleeve for 2 years. I raised my hands. Slowly, deliberately, I signed. My name is Helen. Lily froze. Her eyes went wide. She stared at my hands. Then she looked at my face. Then back at my hands. It was as if she had seen a magic trick. I did it again. I am your grandmother. She didn't know the sign for grandmother. Why would she? She didn't have one. But she recognized the movement. She recognized the intent. For the first time in 4 years, someone wasn't waving their hands at her. Someone was speaking to her. She took a cautious step forward. She pointed at herself. I nodded. I signed YOURLILY. She frowned. She made a gesture I didn't understand at first, a chopping motion near her chest. I realized later it was her sign for herself, something related to a shirt she used to wear. She was correcting me. We spent the next hour in a silent dance. I showed her the sign for house, for safe, for food. She soaked it up like a sponge dropped in water. The feral child the social worker warned me about, she was gone. In her place was a starving intelligence, desperate for data. But the real counterattack began when I took her to her room. I had spent months preparing it. I had painted the ceiling dark blue and stuck hundreds of glow-in-the-dark stars on it. I remembered Christopher loving astronomy when he was a boy. I thought maybe it ran in the blood. Lily walked into the room and stopped. She looked at the bed. Then she looked at the corner of the room. She walked over to the corner, curled up into a ball on the rug, and pulled her knees to her chest. She refused to look at the bed. I realized then that she wasn't used to a bed. Or maybe she wasn't allowed on one in the last place. Or maybe a bed was where bad things happened. I didn't force her. I went to the linen closet, got a blanket and a pillow, and I laid them on the floor next to her. I sat down on the rug, my old joints screaming in protest. I sat there with her, shoulder to shoulder on the floor. She looked at me, confused. She nudged me, gesturing toward the door as if telling me to leave. I signed, I stay. And that's when the dam broke. She started to cry. It wasn't a child's cry for attention. It was a silent, body-shaking sob of exhaustion. She buried her face in her knees. As she cried, she made a sign I didn't recognize. She kept repeating it, 2 fingers tapping her chin, then pointing to the door. Over and over. Frantic. I didn't know the word. I grabbed my ASL dictionary from the nightstand, flipping through pages, trying to match the hand shape. And then I found it. She wasn't signing a word. She was mimicking a specific person. A man. She was miming a beard. She pointed to the door, made the beard sign, and then looked at me with a question in her eyes that shattered me. She wasn't asking where she was. She was asking if he was coming. She remembered Christopher. Somewhere, deep in the neural pathways formed before she was 2, she remembered the man who had held her and then handed her away. She was waiting for him. She thought this was another holding cell until he came back. The realization made my blood run cold. Christopher hadn't just abandoned her. He was the ghost haunting her. She didn't know he was the one who rejected her. In her child's mind, maybe she thought she was lost and he was looking for her. She had been waiting 5 years for a father who had erased her existence to save his career. I reached out and gently touched her hand. I needed her to understand. I couldn't lie to her. I signed, "He is not here." Her face crumbled. The hope vanished, replaced by that dead, dull look of acceptance I had seen in the driveway. She curled tighter on the floor. I lay down next to her on the rug. The floor was hard, and I knew I wouldn't be able to walk straight in the morning. But I wasn't moving. I looked up at the plastic stars on the ceiling. I thought about my son in Seattle, probably sleeping in his high-thread count sheets, thinking his life was clean and uncomplicated. He had no idea what he had done. He hadn't just left a child, he had left a waiting room in her heart that no one else could fill. But as I watched Lily's breathing slow down, a fierce, hot anger started to build in my chest. It wasn't the frantic worry of the last few years. It was the cold, calculated rage of a matriarch. He thought she was broken. I would show him broken. He thought he could walk away. I was going to raise this girl to be so undeniable, so brilliant, so magnificent, that his rejection would become the greatest shame of his life. I looked at the back of her head. You are not a complication, I thought. You are the mission. The counterattack had officially begun. I wasn't just raising a child. I was rebuilding a human being from the rubble my son left behind. And I had a lot of work to do. They say you can't put a price tag on love, but I'm here to tell you that you absolutely can. Sometimes love looks like a hug, but sometimes love looks like a check written for $28,000, knowing it will drain the account you were saving for your own long-term care. By the time Lily had been with me for 6 months, the honeymoon period, if you could call 2 traumatized people learning to live together a honeymoon, was over. We had a rhythm, yes. But we also had a wall we couldn't climb: education. I tried the public school system first. I had to. I was a creature of public education, after all. But the meeting with the district administrator was one of the most infuriating hours of my life. I sat across from a woman who looked at Lily's file and didn't see a child. She saw a budget deficit. She explained to me, in that patronizing bureaucratic voice, that they would place Lily in a comprehensive special needs classroom. I knew what that meant. It meant a room at the end of the hallway where they put the children they didn't know how to teach. She told me they had an interpreter who came in twice a week. Twice a week? I asked her if she would be happy learning English only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She didn't like that. She told me I was being unrealistic. She said that at my age, I should be grateful for whatever support the state provided. I walked out of there holding Lily's hand so tight my knuckles turned white. I looked at my granddaughter, who was watching a bird fly overhead, completely unaware that the world was trying to clip her wings. I knew right then that if I put her in that room, the light behind her eyes would go out forever. That's when I found the private school for the deaf. It was an hour's drive away. It was a beautiful campus where every teacher, every janitor, and every cafeteria worker was fluent in ASL. It was a place where deafness wasn't a disability. It was just a way of being. It also cost $28,000 a year, plus therapy, plus the specialized equipment. I went home and pulled out my financial records. I had my teacher's pension, a modest 401k, and the savings my late husband and I had scraped together for 30 years. We had saved that money for a rainy day. Well, I looked at Lily sitting on the floor, struggling to articulate a thought because she didn't have the words yet, and I decided it was pouring. I didn't consult a financial advisor. I knew what they would say. Helen, you're 75. You need that money for assisted living. You need a safety net. To hell with the safety net. I was the safety net. I wrote the check. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but when it started, it was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower blooming. Within 3 months at that school, Lily wasn't just learning. She was devouring the world. She came home one afternoon, eyes shining, and for the first time, she didn't just point or mime. She put down her backpack, looked at me, and signed with clumsy but determined fingers. The butterfly eats with feet? I froze. She was asking a biology question. My biology question. I fell to my knees right there in the kitchen. I signed back, yes. Taste buds on feet. She giggled. It was the first time I had heard her laugh, a real belly-deep laugh, not a nervous titter. In the first 2 years, I spent $80,000. I stopped buying new clothes. I canceled my cable. I started eating a lot more pasta and a lot less roast beef. My savings account, which used to look like a fortress, started to look like a ruin. But every dollar I spent was a brick in the foundation of the person Lily was becoming. She was catching up. She was learning math, history, and art. She was making friends who didn't look at her like she was broken. One night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, paying the bills, feeling the anxiety tighten my chest. The numbers were getting low, dangerously low. I was 77 now. If I got sick, if I fell, the house of cards would collapse. Lily walked in. She was 8 years old now. She saw the worry on my face. She was always so perceptive. She walked over and placed her hand on my cheek. She signed, "Grandma sad?" I forced a smile and signed, "Just tired, old bones." She shook her head. She signed, "You not old, you strong, like oak tree." I started to cry. My son, the successful financial consultant, saw me as a liability. He saw his daughter as a sunk cost. But this little girl, who he threw away, saw me as an oak tree. I realized then that Christopher had built his life on accumulating wealth, but he was emotionally bankrupt. I was bleeding money every single day, but I was the richest woman on earth. But secrets have a way of festering. I had spent so much energy building this sanctuary for Lily that I had forgotten the outside world still existed. And the outside world was about to come knocking. It was December. The Christmas lights were up. I was feeling that false sense of security that comes with holiday cheer. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the door, expecting a package delivery. I opened it, and the cold winter air rushed in. But it wasn't the wind that froze me. Standing on my porch, shaking snow off his expensive wool coat, was Christopher. He looked older, tired. He held a bottle of wine like a peace offering that was 3 years too late. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, offering that charming smile that used to work on everyone.
"I was in the area for business. Thought I'd surprise you." He stepped past me into the hallway before I could stop him. He didn't know. He thought he was walking into his mother's quiet, empty house. He had no idea that just down the hall, in a room full of glow-in-the-dark stars, was the daughter he thought he had deleted. The oak tree was about to face the storm. The hallway of my house has always been a bit of a wind tunnel when the front door is open, and that night, the winter air bit right through my cardigan. But it was nothing compared to the chill radiating from my son. Christopher stepped inside, shaking off the snow, filling the entryway with the scent of expensive cologne and entitlement. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just assumed his place in my home was permanent, regardless of the 3 years of silence he had gifted me. He started talking immediately, the words tumbling out in a rush of nervous energy. He told me about his flight, about the weather in Seattle, about how Rachel, his wife, wanted to come but had a last-minute client meeting. He handed me the bottle of wine with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, telling me he just wanted to check in on his old mom. He was playing the role of the dutiful son perfectly, assuming I was just the lonely widow waiting for scraps of his attention. He didn't know that the lonely widow had been replaced by a warrior. I was trying to figure out how to get him back out the door, or at least into the kitchen away from the bedrooms, but fate moves faster than an 80-year-old woman. Before I could herd him away, the floorboards in the hallway creaked. Christopher stopped mid-sentence. He turned. Standing there, framed by the doorway of the living room, was Lily. She was wearing her flannel pajamas with the little rocket ships on them. She was holding her favorite stuffed rabbit by the ear. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the stranger in the expensive coat who was staring at her as if he were seeing a ghost. The silence that followed was loud enough to shatter glass. I watched my son's face cycle through a complex series of emotions. First, confusion. Then, recognition. Because you cannot deny your own eyes looking back at you, no matter how hard you try. And finally, a look of absolute horrified betrayal. He didn't kneel down to say hello. He didn't ask her name. He didn't show a single flicker of paternal instinct. He turned to me, his face twisting into a snarl that made him look ugly despite his handsome features. He demanded to know what she was doing here. He didn't say, "Lily." He didn't say, "my daughter." He said, "she," like she was a piece of furniture he had ordered to the dump that had somehow reappeared in his living room. I stepped between them. I might have been 78 years old at that point, with a bad hip and trembling hands, but I planted my feet like the roots of that oak tree Lily talked about. I told him calmly that she lived here. I told him this was her home. He lowered his voice to a hiss, glancing at Lily as if she were a bomb about to go off. He accused me of insanity. He told me I had lost my mind. He asked if I had any idea what I was doing to his life. He actually claimed that I was sabotaging him, that I was keeping this secret alive just to spite him. He told me that he had built a new life, a clean life, and that my confusion and senility were going to ruin everything he had worked for. He thought I was keeping her out of spite. He couldn't conceive that I was keeping her out of love. Lily was watching us. She couldn't hear the venom in his voice, but she could read the body language perfectly. She saw the aggression. She saw her grandmother standing like a shield. She took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. I looked Christopher in the eye and told him he needed to lower his voice. I told him that he didn't get to dictate who lived in my house. I reminded him that he was the one who walked away. He laughed, a cruel, desperate sound. He told me that he was her father, legally or not, and that he could call social services. He threatened to tell them that an elderly woman was incapable of caring for a special needs child. He said he would have her removed just to clean up the mess I had made. He tried to use my age as a weapon again, just like he did in that hospital room years ago. That was the moment. That was the moment I had been preparing for since I sat in Margaret Liu's office and emptied my savings account.
I walked over to the side table where I kept my important papers. I picked up a blue folder. I didn't throw it at him. I handed it to him with the gentle precision of a teacher handing back a failing grade. I told him to read it. He opened the folder. I watched his eyes scan the document. I watched the color drain from his face. It was the adoption decree, finalized 1 month prior. I explained to him very clearly that he had no rights to threaten. I told him that the state of Oregon agreed that I was not just her grandmother, but her mother. I told him that legally, Lily Brennan was my daughter. I told him that he was a stranger in the eyes of the law, and if he ever tried to use my age against me again, I would use his abandonment against him in every court in the country. He dropped the folder on the table. He looked at me, and for the first time, he looked small. He realized that the helpless old woman he had dismissed had outmaneuvered him completely. He looked at Lily one last time. She was hiding behind my leg now, peeking out with terrified eyes. He muttered something about how I would regret this. He told me I was taking on a burden that would kill me. He said I was stubborn and foolish, and that when I died, she would have no one. I told him that she would always have more than he did, because she had a heart that worked. He turned and walked out the door. He didn't look back. The door slammed shut, and the vibration rattled the pictures on the wall. I locked the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the latch, but I did it. I turned around and knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees. Lily was trembling. She looked at the door, then at me. She raised her hands, her fingers moving hesitantly. She asked, "Who is man?" I took a deep breath. I could have lied. I could have told her he was a salesman or a distant cousin. But we didn't build our life on lies. I signed, "He is Christopher. He is your biology father." She frowned. She processed this. Then she looked at the door with a profound, childish wisdom. She signed, "He looks cold." I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair. I held her until the shaking stopped, hers and mine. I realized then that the battle wasn't over. Christopher was gone, but his shadow had finally touched us. He knew she was here. He knew I had defied him. And a man like Christopher, who views people as assets or liabilities, doesn't handle defeat well. But as I held my daughter, my granddaughter, my heart, I knew one thing for sure. He thought age made me weak. He was about to learn that age is just the accumulation of survival skills. And I had survived him once. I would do it again. You can build a fortress out of lies, reinforcing the walls with half-truths and sealing the cracks with denial, but you can never account for the wind. And the wind always blows eventually. Christopher had spent 5 years building a perfect, sterile life in Seattle with Rachel. He had told her his past was clean. He had told her his mother was a sweet but deteriorating old woman losing her grip on reality. He had constructed a reality where he was the hero and I was the tragedy. But the thing about the truth is that it doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it just plays the violin. It was a Tuesday in April. The tulips were pushing up through the soil in the front yard, stubborn and bright. I was in the kitchen, helping Lily with her math homework. Fractions were currently her nemesis, when a silver car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Christopher. It was Rachel. I had only met my daughter-in-law twice, briefly, at weddings and funerals. She was a sharp, intelligent woman, a marketing executive who prided herself on reading people. But she had been reading a book written by a liar. She came to the door looking concerned. She told me she was in the area for a client consultation and decided to stop by because Christopher had been so worried about my episodes. He had told her I was forgetting to eat, that I was imagining people who weren't there. She was there on a mercy mission, expecting to find a house in disarray and an old woman in decline. I invited her in. I saw the confusion flicker in her eyes as she took in the clean hallway, the smell of fresh bread, the orderliness of a life well lived. It didn't match the picture of dementia Christopher had painted. We sat in the living room. She held her teacup with both hands and started asking me gentle, probing questions about my memory. She asked if I was lonely living in this big house all by myself. "I'm not by myself," I said, taking a sip of my own tea. Rachel smiled that patient, pitying smile. She started to say something about how hard it must be to be alone, how the mind plays tricks. And that's when Lily started practicing. From the back room, the clear, melancholic notes of a violin began to drift through the house. It was Bach. Lily had been playing for 2 years, and while she couldn't hear the notes the way we did, she felt the vibration against her jawbone. Her pitch was perfect. Rachel froze. She looked at the ceiling, then at me. She asked if I had the radio on. I shook my head. I told her I didn't listen to the radio much these days. She stood up, drawn by the sound. I didn't stop her. I remained seated in my armchair, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. The play was over. The curtain was rising. Rachel walked down the hallway. I heard her gasp. I pulled myself up and followed her. She was standing in the doorway of the music room. Lily was there, her back to us, her small body swaying slightly with the rhythm of the bow. The sunlight caught the hearing aids behind her ears, glinting like jewelry. Rachel turned to me, her face pale. She asked who that child was. She asked why there was a little girl in my house. Before I could answer, the front door flew open. Christopher. He must have been tracking Rachel's phone, or maybe she had texted him that she was stopping by. He burst into the house, breathless, panic radiating off him like heat. He ran down the hall, saw us standing there, and shouted for Rachel to get away from me. He started babbling, claiming that I was babysitting for a neighbor, that I was confused, that we had to leave now. He was trying to shovel the avalanche back up the mountain. Lily stopped playing. She turned around, holding the violin and bow. She looked at Rachel, then at Christopher. She didn't look scared this time. She looked at him with a calm, piercing curiosity. Rachel looked at Christopher, who was sweating and manic. Then she looked back at Lily. She saw the eyes, the unmistakable, sapphire blue eyes that were identical to the man standing in the hallway. She looked at the hearing aids. She looked at the age of the child. I watched the tumblers in Rachel's mind click into place. The math, the timeline, the complication Christopher had vaguely alluded to years ago before they got serious. Rachel turned to her husband. Her voice was trembling, but it was sharp as a razor. She asked him if this was her. She asked if this was the mistake he had taken care of. Christopher tried to laugh it off. He reached for Rachel's arm, telling her not to be ridiculous, telling her that his mother was staging this to hurt him. He called Lily a prop. That was enough. I stepped forward. I used my teacher voice, the one that can stop a hallway fight from 50 feet away. "Stop lying, Christopher," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Rachel. I told her the truth. I told her that this was Lily Brennan. I told her she was 12 years old. I told her that her father didn't want a deaf daughter, so he threw her away like garbage. I told her that I didn't find her in a cabbage patch. I found her in the foster system where he left her. "He told you I was senile," I said to Rachel, who was now crying silently, her hand over her mouth. "He told you I was losing my mind." "I wasn't losing my mind, Rachel. I was finding his daughter." Christopher screamed at me to shut up. He looked like a cornered animal. He turned to Lily, perhaps thinking he could intimidate her into silence. But Lily wasn't the victim anymore. She put her violin down on the stand with deliberate care. She walked over to me and took my hand. Then she looked at her father and signed 3 simple words. Rachel looked at me, pleading for translation. She said, I translated, my voice breaking with pride, "You are a stranger." Rachel looked at Christopher with a revulsion so deep it looked like physical pain. She saw the man she married for, who he really was, a man who could look at his own child and see nothing but a defect, a man who could lie to his wife for years while his mother raised his daughter in secret. She pulled her arm away from his grasp as if he burned her. She told him she was taking the car. She told him not to follow her. Christopher stood in the hallway, stripped of his lies, stripped of his arrogance. The perfect life he had protected at the cost of his own soul had just walked out the door. He looked at me, expecting me to feel guilty, expecting me to apologize for ruining him. I just looked back at him, holding Lily's hand. I told him that the truth is a heavy thing to carry, but it's the only thing worth holding on to. He left. The door didn't slam this time. It just clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the house. I looked down at Lily. She was calm. She picked up her violin again. "Grandma," she signed, "can we finish fractions now?" "Yes, honey," I signed back. "We can finish everything now." The aftermath of a hurricane is always quieter than the storm itself. You expect there to be shouting and chaos, but in reality, it's just the sound of picking up the pieces. For Christopher, the pieces were shattered beyond repair. Rachel didn't just leave him. She filed for divorce with a speed and efficiency that I frankly admired. She cited irreconcilable differences, but we all knew the real reason was the lie he had slept beside for 5 years. She couldn't build a future with a man who had thrown away his past so callously. My son visits twice a year now. He drives down from Seattle in a car that's slightly less expensive than the one he used to drive, wearing suits that look a little less crisp. He sits on my sofa, the same sofa where he once told me I was confused, and he drinks my tea, looking around the room with eyes full of regret. He tries to buy his way back in. He brings Lily expensive gadgets, tablets, designer clothes. He thinks he can purchase the years he missed. But children, especially children like Lily, are human lie detectors. She accepts his gifts with a politeness that chills the air. She signs, "Thank you," but she never signs, "I love you." Last month, during one of these awkward visits, Christopher tried to play the victim. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes and told me that he had made a mistake, that he was young and scared back then. He tried to imply that I had stolen her from him, that I had turned her against him. I didn't even have to answer. Lily did it for me. She put down the new iPad he had just given her, looked him in the eye, and signed to me. She told me that he could be my son, and she would respect that, but that I was her real mother. She didn't say it with anger. She said it with the simple, brutal honesty of a 12-year-old who knows exactly who showed up for the doctor's appointments, the nightmares, and the violin recitals. At 80 years old, my life isn't easy. I won't lie to you and say it's a fairy tale ending where we run through fields of daisies. Raising a preteen when your hips ache when it rains and your energy fades by 7:00 p.m. is the hardest thing I've ever done. My savings, once a comfortable nest egg, have dwindled down to about $150,000. The cost of specialized education, therapists, and just living has taken its toll. I worry about money in the quiet hours of the morning. I worry about what will happen when I'm gone. But then, the front door opens. Lily runs in from school, her backpack thumping against the floor. She is 12 now. She is tall, lanky, and beautiful in a way that makes my heart ache. She wants to be a veterinarian because she says animals talk with their bodies, just like us. She gets straight A's. She plays the violin with a passion that makes grown men cry. She runs to me, and she doesn't see an old woman who is burning through her inheritance. She sees her anchor. She starts signing frantically, telling me about her day, about the math test she crushed, about the boy she thinks is cute but won't admit it. Her face lights up, animated and alive. I look at her, and I remember the baby in the car seat who was called a complication. I remember the toddler curling up on the floor because she didn't know what a bed was. And I look at the brilliant young woman standing before me. Christopher called her a defect. I spent 8 years proving she was a masterpiece. My friends tell me I should be resting. They tell me I sacrificed my golden years. They don't understand. These are my golden years. I didn't sacrifice anything. I gained everything. I learned a new language at 72. I fought the state at 75. I became a mother again when the world told me I was done. Family isn't about whose DNA you carry. It's not about convenience or perfect trajectories. Family is about who is willing to learn a new language just to tell you that you matter. It's about the person who stays when the room gets quiet. My son moved on to find a perfect life and ended up alone. I stayed behind to fix what was broken and ended up whole. So, if you're watching this and thinking you're too old to start over, or that it's too late to make a difference, look at my hands. They are wrinkled, they shake a little, and they hurt when it rains. But they can speak volumes, and they hold the hand of a girl who was thrown away, a girl who is now the center of my universe. We are going to be okay. Lily is going to be okay. And as for me, I'm just getting started. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, doesn't it? And please, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like ours, because every grandmother has a tale that needs to be told, and I have a feeling we have a lot more to say.